Hello and welcome to the first edition, I think we should call them editions, of What the Heckonomics.
Because it's classy.
Because it's classy. My name is Jake Lloyd, and I am an actor, writer, filmmaker, comedian, and I am one of those artsy types who admittedly doesn't know a lot about economics. Luckily, I have an incredibly good friend by the name of Brian Finifter, who I'm sitting with currently.
I also know mostly nothing about economics. No, so I want to make it clear up front that I have no like academic or professional training in economics. I'm just a nerd.
Yeah, but
this is just a thing that I nerd out about.
We're different types of nerds because
Yes.
you're the type of nerd.
Like I'm a real nerd, and you're kind of like the poser nerd.
Oh, that hurt right down deep.
I know.
You're the type of nerd who's like, hey, there's a thing I want to know about. I am going to actually learn about it.
Yeah, well, it's more like it's as an ADD thing of like, hey, my brain is going to decide to think about this and only this for the next 6 months.
Gotcha.
And there's just nothing you can do about it.
As far as ADD goes, I think that's a very long span to be concentrating on something. Not sure it's the right term to use.
No, I mean,
obsession, maybe.
Well, yeah, in the sense of like the same thing happens with like Game of Thrones or any like kind of topic.
Right.
Like my brain, and sure, moment to moment, the brain still goes everywhere. But
Sure.
like for the next 9 months, I don't care about knowing about anything other than Game of Thrones or economics or whatever the hell it happens to be.
So with that said, in the past year, I'd say maybe year and a half, I remember you were reading that book as we were shooting my movie. I remember you reading the book out on the field, the baseball field.
Farewell to Alms, I believe that one was.
And that was when I saw you really starting to dive into the sort of obsession with economics and how economics works and how, you know, generally the scope of economics, the viewpoint of economics by the general public is very skewed.
Yeah. Well, so it goes back to like I guess about like 3 or so years. I was working this terrible job, and I was stuck in a inventory warehouse stockroom forever.
Right.
So I was just listening to podcasts, and so I went through the whole like backlog of Freakonomics that I'd listened to, and then started on Planet Money, which is a great economics podcast that NPR puts on.
Sure.
And just ended up going through their entire catalog of that was literally like 8 years or something at that point of worth of stuff.
So you got your learn on.
So yeah, because I just didn't have anything else fucking to do in that terrible room. But it was great. And I think I'd always been interested in economics, but it never really fully clicked with me because the stuff that I did learn or the sources that I were exposed to never felt like they were actually kind of revealing a real truth about how the universe works, if that makes sense. So like, oh, you have this drive to understand whatever corner of the universe that you're passionate about, right? And I felt like that's all, it was always there, but the various kind of aspects of it that I was exposed to never clicked. And it's like, oh, that doesn't feel like a great truth.
Okay,
you know what
I
mean?
get it. Yeah, sure.
Like I took microecon in college as that sort of thing. And we can get into all of this, but there's this strain to economics that is very like free market is all and everything, and it's just a particular philosophy that some people are very attached to that never really felt like it was fully reflective of truth to me.
Did what you were reading sort of feel like propaganda to you in a way? Like sort of like, wait a minute.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, specifically in the sense of the microecon class in college, like I consciously knew it was because the teacher, the professor was just one of those
old school.
Yeah, just like price gouging is not a bad thing.
Right.
It's like,
capitalism good, communism bad.
Yeah, free market
socialism bad. Yeah.
Free market is always correct no matter what. And so here's the thing. Having started like first with Freakonomics and then much more so with Planet Money and then all the books and blogs and everything else I've read since then, I've actually become much more appreciative of the power of market forces and how that whole thing works.
Sure.
Much more so than when I was in college and I was a budding Democrat and, you know, all of that.
And it should also be stated that you are a fairly new entrepreneur, the owner of your own company. So now also you're taking a lot of the stuff that you had just an interest in, and now it's sort of applicable to your day to day because you're now a
Yeah.
business owner trying to make money and learning firsthand how economics is working.
And yeah, so the two are inextricably linked, and I don't think it's a coincidence that I started my business and this kind of obsession started at the same time. Sometimes I sort of half jokingly say that I'm the only like small business owner or entrepreneur in the world who felt like he needed a working understanding of macroeconomics before he could get started.
Okay.
Because it's like the two don't really have anything to do with each other, but just the way I'm wired, it'd be like, no, I have to understand how all of economics works before I can start my own business.
Fair enough.
That's how my brain works.
That sort of plays into your, the aforementioned nerdisms.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, I need to understand everything. So.
Okay, so I think as by way of introduction, that's not bad.
Is that all right as an introduction?
I feel like, when people ask what the Heckonomics is, it's that. You know, like
great, because I have no idea what it is.
Well, you're going to do the best to share your research and your understanding of it with me, who admittedly knows nothing about it. Like, I know as much as I learned in high school that I mostly forgot.
Right. That you couldn't completely tune out in high school at the time, right?
Yeah.
Even though you tuned out like 99%
I have a basic
of it.
understanding of what capitalism is. After that.
So you know that the words supply and demand are important in some way.
Sure.
And that's probably about it, right?
Yeah. And so with that said, by way of establishing a precedence for the listeners, it's okay to be like, this guy's a fucking idiot, because I know, I get it. Like, I get it. I might ask questions that seem obvious to certain people,
but again, I want to emphasize the fact that I am not professionally trained or studied in any way.
But it's more about sort of this is great. It's sort of like, this is how honest education really should happen.
Sure,
it should happen.
I can be on board with that.
By a person who is doing the best they can to become knowledgeable, passing said knowledge on to other people.
And that education doesn't have to happen within
a college.
Within the rigor, the formal rigor of a classroom. Like it is possible to go out and just learn on your own.
Right.
And become good at a subject or a domain on your own.
Right.
So we live in a world where that's possible now, which is great.
And so this is sort of a economics podcast for people who don't really already understand everything about economics.
And hopefully in a way that
is digestible.
In a way, because I think the Planet Money stuff is super digestible and I highly recommend it. But a lot of economic stuff is not digestible. Right. And if you're driving home and listening to whatever and the Fed chairman Janet Yellen today said interest rates,
you're
blah,
lost
blah.
Immediately.
And there's actually
I fell asleep halfway through that sentence.
And we can get into why they do that on purpose, because they do that on purpose, but that's probably another episode. But anyway, in a way of explaining all of this stuff that's actually really super important and underlying everything that happens in our world and affects our day-to-day lives.
Right.
In a way that hopefully is digestible and entertaining.
Fantastic. And so, of course, as I said up top, I would like to label these editions. It's not going to be a weekly show. It may be a monthly show is kind of what we think for now.
We'll see. Yeah.
We'll see. There is a lot to learn, obviously. But with that said, we're going to try to get through this together.
Yeah. So what basically the impetus of this is it's all of the fights I get into on Facebook with libertarians is essentially the genesis.
So
of
libertarians not our target demo is what you're telling me?
Well, if we can break through to some of them, maybe, but we can't, because you can't break through to libertarians.
All right, the opinions of Brian Finifter do not reflect the opinions of all of us here.
Sorry if you're a libertarian, I don't really care. So. Yeah, I mean, but honestly, that is the impetus because, as we were saying, there's I think there's a lot of people running around with a very half-baked conception of certain aspects of economic thought or whatever, practice, whatever. And it just annoys the hell out of me. So really, this is trying to be a vehicle for me to work out some of that frustration.
And maybe by approaching,
doing some good collateral damage.
Yeah, but by way of me learning. Also, having me to challenge you is probably not a difficult thing either, because I'm going to approach everything from zero.
Right.
I'm not going to leaning in any specific
Yeah,
way at
no,
first.
there's
Right.
no pre-existing whatever
Conditions. Just say. So with that said,
Yeah.
is there a general topic for edition 1?
Yes, there is. It's this term that is going to sound crazy complicated, but is very simple, and we'll go into why it's simple, called an externality.
An externality.
Externality. And so this goes into the core of why free markets are great,
Okay.
but they're not perfect. And everybody who out there in the world generally saying free markets are the best, generally are not thinking about externalities. And if they it's so fucking simple. Just
Gotcha.
anyway, and so that's the frustration.
Okay.
All right.
Let me ask you this question. Do you think I should have a notebook for these?
I mean, maybe you might. I don't know.
For the sake of notes?
That's up to you, man. I don't know. Well, let's see if we can do it without it.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So we're gonna try to make this a lesson in what an externality is in a very digestible way.
Sure.
Okay. So there is the philosophy, there is the mindset that a free market, a free and open, fair market is the most efficient way to decide where resources go. Like who gets what resources when the resources are limited, right?
Okay.
And so when people are talking about the free market is best and the free market should take care of, that's what they're talking about. Is like,
and when you say that, like resources, you mean for companies or for individuals? Like
for anything, for people, for just
everything.
In terms of like if there is X amount of stuff, but there's more demand for that stuff, like how do you decide who gets X?
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
In any context that would apply. And so when people are talking about the free market is great, the free market is best, let the free market do the free market thing, this is what they're talking about. The free market is the most efficient way to decide where those resources gets and how they get there most efficiently.
Okay,
right?
understood.
And the reason is, that is true. That is correct. And people are right when they say that. The reason that is the case is because in a market, you have people doing the transactions themselves, like you and I in a transaction with each other, or whoever, Alice and Bob in a transaction with each other. And because you and I in a transaction are paying the cost of that transaction, right? So if I'm going to sell you a board game, for example, I'm going to make sure that I'm selling it to you for more than what my costs are. Otherwise, why
are you doing it?
Exactly. Well, I'm not going to waste my time.
There has to be a benefit on both sides, is what you're getting
and there has
at.
to be more value at the end than there was at the beginning, right?
For both individuals.
For both individuals. And this is why a free market is best, because having that basic kind of like atom of a process, a transaction as an atom, right? And then multiplied by millions of everybody doing transactions for everything everywhere.
Right.
It all adds up to the most efficient way to move stuff around.
Because ultimately the goal is everybody is satisfied, really.
Exactly. And everybody, because they're bearing the cost themselves, are the most motivated to keep those costs down.
Right.
And that creates the most amount of efficiency.
You want to make the most money. I want to spend the least money.
Right. And ultimately get the most amount of value on both sides, right? So that's why free markets are in fact the best way to do that.
Okay.
But here's the thing.
Here's the thing.
Here's the thing. And it doesn't totally invalidate. What I really want to avoid is like, it's Bernie Sanders or it's it's black and white. It's not black and white. These are all tools, and a tool has to be applied to the right job, but also the tool has to be built correctly.
Sure.
Has to be working right. So when all of the costs are directly tied to you and me in the transaction, then it is the most efficient way. But you can have a cost to a transaction that neither you nor I are paying, but that is still a cost to that transaction.
All right. Can you elaborate on that? Because you kind of lost me.
So I think the best way to do it is like go through a hypothetical scenario.
This is going to be always the best.
Yeah.
Practicality for me.
Okay. So imagine I have a factory that makes widgets, and you have a company that makes tractors, and you need to buy my widgets to go into your tractors, right?
Great. Yeah, I need those widgets or else my tractors don't run.
Exactly. And you're not going to make money selling your tractors to farmers, right?
Hashtag gotta have widgets.
Sure. So before I decide what price I'm going to sell my widgets to you, I'm going to take all of the costs that I incur by making the widget, right? So the raw materials, the labor, the electricity bill for the factory, the rent, all it. All of that.
Ooh, your overheads. Is that a word? Did I do it?
Well, overhead, yeah.
Did I do a thing? I did a thing, you guys. business.
It's not exactly what overhead is, but sure, it's close enough.
Damn it.
But I'm going to take all the costs involved in making that widget. I'm going to add them up. I'm going to put a little bit on top for my time or profit.
Right.
And that's the price I'm going to give to you. And you're only going to pay me that price if that widget is more valuable to you
Right.
than that price. Right. So you take say all of those costs add up. It costs me $1,000 to make a widget, right?
Okay.
But now say that as part of the process of making that widget, a side effect is we make some toxic sludge, right?
Ooh,
okay.
I didn't see that. That was a twist.
Ah,
You're like fucking M.
twist.
Night Shyamalan over here.
So I have two choices now that I have this toxic sludge. I have two choices. I can bottle up, put it in a barrel, send it off to be cleaned, and turn it into not toxic sludge, right?
Just regular sludge.
Which would cost money, or to just make it to deal with it,
however
safely,
that
dispose
happens.
of it, which would cost money. Or I could dump it in the river out back behind the factory,
Which is totally free.
and it will then float down the river to the next town, and it's out of my life totally, right?
Sure, of course.
And so let's say that's what I do because it's cheap, and ultimately I'm only worried about the cost to me, and if that's cheaper than the other thing, then it's totally reasonable and practical for me to pick that option.
Okay.
Absent any other consideration. So say it flows down the river to the next town, makes some people sick. And we won't get crazy and dramatic. Like, we're not going to say people died or anything like that. We'll just say
it's not good.
It's not good. Well, I want to make this like quantify and like not,
sure.
Bernie Sanders,
right.
Black flag, white flag. So let's say, like, just for the sake of numbers, it made 10 people sick enough that they had to go to the doctor and get some antibiotics and miss a couple days of work. Okay. And they were fine, and that's it. And
sure,
everything's fine. So, and we're going to make you ignore sick leave and health insurance and all
just
that.
For the sake of this hypothetical.
For the sake of the numbers. So say, okay, 10 people had to go to the doctor and pay a $10 copay each, right? And then they had to buy some antibiotics. And so we'll say the antibiotics cost them $10 each, right?
Okay.
So $100 for these 10 people to go to the doctor, $100 for their medicine, $200.
Sure.
That is a cost to the transaction between you and I that only exists because of our transaction that neither you nor I paid.
Right.
That the people down the river in the town paid.
Understood.
Okay. That's what an externality is.
Oh, okay. So an externality, in a sense, is an acquired cost within a transaction that has nothing to do with the direct transaction. It's sort of a ripple effect or a
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So it is. I mean, literally, it is a cost to this transaction that
neither one of us,
as the two people in the transaction, are paying.
Gotcha.
Right. And again, we're not getting crazy Aaron Brockovich. We're just saying they had to go, and they had to miss a couple days of work. Okay. So that's $200 to that transaction is being paid by somebody, but is not being paid by us.
Right. It's going elsewhere.
Right. And using the phrase ripple effect is really good actually, because you can take that further, right? So you can say, oh, okay, they had to miss a couple of days of work, right? So say they each made $100. That was their daily wage at work, right? So they each missed out on $200 worth of wages, right?
Right.
So that's $200 that didn't actually change hands, but
is gone.
It's value that they didn't get because of this transaction, right? It's what's called an opportunity cost.
And maybe the fact that they weren't there at work made the company that they work for potentially lose money.
Exactly. So just like in our transaction, presumably their companies aren't employing them unless they're getting more out of that transaction, right? So say they pay those employees $100 a day, but they get whatever work they do generates $200 worth of value, right?
Right.
So all of those companies are losing $200 worth of value from the work that their employees are not doing because they missed those couple of days of work.
All because I'm trying to sell a tractor and you're trying to sell a widget.
Exactly.
And these people don't even have fucking front lawns.
Exactly. And maybe they buy the food that the farmer is going to take to market that they grow with your tractors, which may,
sure.
That's the other thing is economics is this whole, giant spider web of connections, right?
Right. It's like it's like in CSI, it's like the guy with the threads all over his wall to find the murderer. Yeah.
Exactly.
And in this instance, nobody's the murderer and everybody's the murderer in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, at the very least, we're all connected in these various ways, right? So all of those ripple effects are costs that go to this transaction.
Sure.
That we're not paying only because, if you want to be cynical, you can say because we can get away without paying it, right? And in some cases, it is they can get away without paying it, but it doesn't even.
In some instances, they might not even know it exists.
Some instances they don't know it exists, like.
Because when you dumped that shit in the river, you didn't follow up to make sure that anybody got sick. You just went on with selling widgets and making widgets and went on to the next deal. Yeah.
Maybe I don't know that the toxic sludge is toxic right away or ever, and it's not until somebody puts it together that you understand.
Yeah, maybe it's not like glowing green like in the movies. It's just like basic sludge. And how are you to know it's not glowing green?
Well, it's exactly what lead was, right? Like we didn't know lead was toxic.
Sure, fair, yeah.
In the beginning,
I was trying to make a dumb joke, but that's actually a perfect example. Yeah,
that's basically the history of all of environmental laws at all, right? Is like, oh shit, this thing we were doing,
not so great.
Whoops, and so then we have to figure out a new way of doing the same thing. But now, it would be very easy to stop at this point and say, oh, well, as the greedy capitalist factory owner, whatever, we're, assholes because we don't care, right?
Right.
And yeah, some people are assholes, fine.
Yeah,
but
I'm sure that exists.
It totally does exist. But it doesn't even have to be that to still have this situation, right? So say I'm not an asshole, and
let's just pretend.
Let's pretend, hypothetically. And you say, okay, I know what's happening. I know the consequences of the action that I'm doing, and I don't want to do it. I want to be a proper citizen and good neighbor and all of that, but I'm sort of forced to. Right. And how could I possibly be forced to do this terrible thing? So most likely, I'm not the only widget maker on the block, right?
Understood.
So they say there's me, and then there's two other guys down the road that also make widgets, and basically,
and every widget fits in my tractor. I can go to whichever one I want.
Basically, they're all the same, and they cost us all the same to make, so therefore we all sell them for basically the same price, right?
So it's just essentially it's competition, but it's not necessarily like a clear competition.
Yeah. Well, so the competition is part of what makes a free market work, right? Is because you compete against each other to do the best job, right?
Right.
But the competition also creates what's called a coordination problem, in which we can't all necessarily move at the same step, even if it's in the right direction, right? So say all three of us make a widget and it's basically the same for the same price at the same cost, right? And I could really hate the fact that I have to dump this toxic sludge out back, right? And go, no, I really want to spend the extra money to clean it and take care of it responsibly.
Right.
But in order to do that, I'll have to raise my prices. Otherwise, I'm going to lose money.
Sure.
If I raise my prices and the other two people, you're going to go to the other guys.
That's more money.
Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. I don't know. But can I take that risk?
Right.
Is the thing. Like I could talk to you and say, hey, this is the deal.
You can run a PR campaign about how you're cleaning sludge so you're more expensive. And I might go, hey, you know what? I want to go with the socially conscious company because I don't mind paying more money for the environment. But I also might be like, shit, business is business and I got to feed my kids.
Exactly.
So
and I don't know which way it's going to go.
19 kids.
And I don't know which way it's going to go. And so it's ultimately a matter of, am I going to take that risk?
Right.
Because I got kids to feed. And if I take the risk and it's the wrong choice, then I go out of business and fuck that, right?
Yeah, of course.
That's a huge risk. What's more is all three of us widget makers could all feel exactly the same way and all be willing to spend the extra money to clean it and all raise our prices.
So that's what you meant about the discoordination or whatever.
The coordination problem. Yeah.
Gotcha.
If all three of us could want to be do the responsible and right thing,
you could all raise your prices to the exact same amount, all be doing the sludge cleaning, and then still are at the same spot you were, but now we're cleaning sludge.
And that's if everything goes right. Right? So even if all three of us want to do it, if we don't trust each other sufficiently to all do it at the same time, then one of us can get away with not doing it,
right?
And then the other two of us will go out of business,
right?
So you can have a situation where you have this shitty thing happening that is causing this cost, that it makes this transaction not the most efficient way to do everything, right? And has this negative externality,
right?
And then have a situation where even everybody wants to fix it and make it better, but it's still hard to actually get it to happen.
There's this standstill because of a lack of ability to communicate, a lack of
trust, a lack of coordination,
because
a lack of communication.
That's literally businesses are in competition.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it's not likely that if I'm going to be calling up other tractor places and being like, hey, I just got a quick question for you. Do you guys just want to like drop our prices a little bit because of this? Or you want to raise our prices because of this? Like,
and in fact, that's illegal to do that. That's collusion. It's impossible. It is illegal for companies, competing companies, to get together and coordinate what their prices are going to be.
I did not know that.
So
because it has to be determined by the quote, the market, the free market.
exactly, because otherwise
Okay.
that's what's called anti-competitive. You want the free market to be open and competitive, and that's how you
Right.
ensure the best price and most
Sure.
efficient distribution of resources, right? And so then if you have companies getting together, if you had Coke and Pepsi coming together and saying, we promise
Right.
we won't sell it for less than $5, right?
Right.
That's, you can't do that.
Wow.
Now our current political environment means that people are getting away with a whole bunch of shit, but
Right.
that's a separate issue. So it's still possible for companies and organizations and countries to get together to coordinate about like externalities and pollution and that sort of thing.
Sure.
But it's still difficult, right? So the Paris Accord is literally every country on Earth coming together now except one,
Right. Of course.
and saying we are all going to take the same
Right.
big step at the same time.
Right.
And anything else is basically the same expression of that same problem. So climate change is totally that. Any kind of pollution issue is totally that.
Okay.
And so this is, to me, a very basic aspect, thoughts or whatever of what economics is, and is, a tenet of whatever. That's so many people who are advocating for like free markets and libertarianism and all this, just like they don't like free markets are good.
Right.
Yes, free markets are good. And that's economics 101.
Right.
And anybody will tell you that knows anything will say economics 101 is free markets are good.
Right.
But if that's the case, sometimes there are externalities is economics 102.
Right.
And there are so many people who had just gone to economics 101 and think they're fucking experts.
And they were like, I graduated.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
done. And it's like, well,
so essentially there's this whole shade of gray in between the black and the white where you can still heavily lean towards the one side and say like, yeah, no, obviously free market is good, but like there's this giant area where we need to figure out a way to improve it essentially.
yeah. So the way I see it in my head is like, to go back to the tool analogy, is like, if you're going to build a house, you need a hammer, right?
Right.
Like you're not going to build a house without a hammer.
Okay.
But that being said,
Tell it to IKEA.
that being said, you're not going to build a house with just a hammer either.
Right,
If
right.
all you have is a hammer, the house is not coming together. And if your hammer is broken,
Right.
the house isn't coming together either, right? So like to me, the free market is like the hammer. It's
Okay.
like it's the incredibly central, vital,
Right. It's the
basic tool.
the lowest common denominator essentially.
Sure, yeah. It's like the most basic and useful tool in that whole toolkit, but it's still not the end all be all. It's not the whole job itself.
Okay.
And I try on Facebook to explain this. I even literally with a guy who I know, who's a fairly recognizable actor, who is an objectivist, like Ayn Rand's. I don't know if you know about that at all, but
I know the name Ayn Rand gets thrown around a lot when it comes to like douchey college kids.
yeah. So like in terms of like the free market is everything, like
Right.
that is that's
Right.
what Ayn Rand and objectivism is. Like, no, free market does everything. Everybody
Right.
get out of the way of the free market. And so I occasionally have gotten into it with him back and forth about this. And I literally at one point was like, hey, so no, I agree that the free market is, everything we just said. Good
Right.
tool, blah, blah,
Right.
important, blah, blah. But what about externalities? And it's important to understand that literally the definition of an externality is a situation where the free market is not efficient.
Okay.
That's literally the definition of
Okay.
what an externality is. And I said, hey, but what about externalities? And he goes, oh, well, no, the free market will take care of them.
But that's not.
Yeah,
Yeah, that doesn't work.
it's like how are you gonna dry off that pair of pants? Well, the river will take care of that.
Right. Oh, I'm gonna go out in the rain.
Yeah. The rain will take care of that. But
It's like, but they're wet. How do you dry them off? Well, the rain.
The rain will take care of that.
Right.
Why are you so stupid?
Okay, so is there a solution on the table that people discuss and debate about fixing externality or about like?
So what you need is, and I'm going to describe it, and it's going to be very fucking clear as to what it is.
Okay.
But what you need is some organization or some entity that has authority over both the factory, the tractor maker, and the town. that says, okay, we are above the individual transactions.
It sounds like a government. Okay. All
Yeah,
right, okay.
exactly. Some entity that exists above both the corporations and the people, and essentially has responsibility for everybody, and says, okay, we understand that this transaction is happening over here, but that there's a ramification from this transaction happening over here, and so if all else being equal, then those will become disconnected, and we need to make sure that those do get reconnected.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So essentially, I guess the most simple example of that is your company needs to pay.
Yeah, exactly.
To accrue the costs of what the damage was, because then that money that's being spent by the 10 people is now not being spent by the 10 people. It's spent by somebody else.
Right. So so the role of government in this context is saying, okay, the money being spent by those 10 people to go to the doctor is actually a cost from this transaction from you two over here.
Right.
And so we need to make sure that cost gets taken off from them and put back to where it belongs by the people who are actually incurring it, you and me.
Gotcha.
And so in the most like economically dry way of saying it, that's what a government exists to do.
Okay.
What a government's purpose is.
Right. And now obviously there's a whole separate conversation to be had about the government's ability to do this.
Sure. And absolutely there is.
Because government has become business.
Right.
And so now they have their own stake versus just being a governing entity.
So then yes, then there comes in the whole, political philosophy, poli-sci aspect of it.
Is your company paying the government? Do you have a lobby? Like, is there
exactly? Yeah.
Right.
That's a whole can of worms, jar of whatever,
right,
to open too.
But that's not what we're addressing here.
Well, yeah, what we're saying is like ideal, in this kind of simplified model, right? Like in this in a simplified model where it works simply in the way it's supposed to,
right?
Then yes, then the government comes in and says, and this is what theoretically the EPA does is go, okay, well, the mercury coming out of that factory,
the Environmental Protection Agency,
the mercury that comes out of this factory is causing this.
McKenna, I just want you to stop. So you're telling me that the Environmental Protection Agency's job is to protect the environment? Hang on a second, Brian.
Yeah.
Let me wrap my head around this one.
See, aren't you glad that I'm here to explain all of these highfalutin concepts?
But you're right. And again, a separate podcast is about how the fact that an environmental protection agency is being currently run by somebody who doesn't believe the environment really needs protecting.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So one might argue that the simplest form of correcting is it externality or externality?
Externality.
Like external.
Yeah, exactly. It's an external cost.
Gotcha. Externality. One might say then that the simplest fix for externality is better politicians, which is almost a physical impossibility, it seems.
Yeah. Well, politicians that at least understood the concept of an externality, perhaps at least.
So do you think that externality is something that's not covered in general economics media or books or outlets? Or
I don't know.
Because I'm asking that because we started this whole thing with explaining how you've sort of divin. You've divin into it. I'm a fucking wordsmith. That you sort of dove into this. Where did you come across externality in this research? And was it like this is.
Well, so this goes back to what I was saying about like that microecon class that I had where like,
Did it never even come up once?
I can't remember. And based on the things I do remember from that class, I can't imagine that this guy would have ever, it would have ever crossed his mind to talk about this as a concept because there is there's something about economics where, this is more like philosophy of science kind of a topic, but like I think there's like an inferiority complex, honestly, in economics, because in hard sciences like physics and chemistry and biology, like you can run experiments and you can repeat and duplicate those experiments. And that is a very core principle of like, how do we know that we know the things that we know, right? Because we run an experiment, we isolate variables, and then we do that multiple times to make sure to double, triple, quadruple check the answer that we get, right?
Yeah.
And because you have petri dishes and weights and beakers, like you can do that. But you can't do that in economics, you can sort of just like look at the world, and every now and then you get lucky with something or other, but you can't really run science and experiments the way you can physics or chemistry. And I honestly think that has generated an inferiority complex in the field of economics.
Oh.
Of like, well, we're scientists, and what we are studying is science and importance.
Because you're ultimately collecting data.
Yeah. And when you're trying to, ultimately you're trying to create a model of the world, make a prediction, and then see how well that prediction applies to the real world.
Gotcha.
To hopefully create a more accurate model of the world, right? And so as a result, in physics and chemistry and everything else, we have very good models of the world, and they're still not complete, right?
Right,
but
sure.
Enough that we can shoot something the size of your refrigerator to Pluto.
Right.
And 10 years later, it actually fucking gets there, right?
Right,
That's pretty damn good.
Pretty fucking incredible.
Yeah. And so just because of the nature of economics, you don't really have that same level of precision. So there's this like strain in economic thought where I think it's people that are like, and I don't want to mean this derogatorily, but like a religious sense of like what they believe.
Okay.
They're like, no, I believe in this.
The unwavering.
Yeah.
That stern belief, which is unchangeable regardless of new data, new information. There will never be, because it is a reality to these people.
Or just like the built-in skepticism that humans are not really designed to have, but scientists are trained to have, right?
Yeah.
To go like, okay,
question everything.
To question everything, especially the stuff you believe the most, right?
Right. Which is incredibly difficult to do as a human being who desperately just wants an answer.
And science, the brilliance of science as a tool, as a philosophy of whatever you want to call it, is that it overcomes that basic human limitation.
Sure.
But science, as it's built in the lab, is built very carefully to overcome that strong human impulse in terms of like, no, we're going to measure things as precisely as we can and isolate variables, and that way we can't lie to ourselves.
Strictly fact-driven, data-driven information and acceptance.
Just because the nature of economics is just such a messier thing,
right?
It's harder to recreate that
especially
condition.
because it's there, like you said, there's so many more variables. Like if I'm trying to think of a good analogy. If there's like scales, okay, like science is all about finding the balance of left and right. Let's say that there's two scales. There's like the fact that we have here and the fact that we have here and how they balance out. But economics seems like maybe there's 20, 30 of these things.
Yeah.
And numbers 2 through 4 don't even realize that numbers, 24 through 27 even exist.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're all trying to balance, but they can't quite, because again, how do you even measure shit that you don't see?
And because that web is so much more, because that web is so complicated, because there's so many connections, and because in economics it's so much harder to isolate those connections.
Right.
It's so much harder to really nail down those pieces.
Sure.
So I think there's a tendency, a certain political philosophy of like this, and it's just harder for people to let go of that.
Right.
And so there's a very definitive strain of like, the free market aspect of it.
Right. Gotcha.
And so that goes back to what I was saying. Like, I felt like the stuff that I had been exposed to up to a certain point never really felt like it rang the whole truth.
Understood.
Yeah. Until I encountered the Planet Money stuff.
Gotcha.
And that was when I first like, okay, now I feel like I'm actually seeing things and understanding things that I wasn't seeing before.
Gotcha.
And I feel like we've gone on a tangent. I don't remember.
No. Honestly, well, because you were just discussing how a big part of the problem is, of course, that idea that can't be changed, and there's this whole facet of people.
Yeah.
That's sort of where that tangent started. But to get back to it, like, do you think that there is a part of this economic problem, which, again, I know the metaphor that we used was very strictly environmental. There has to be other facts,
for sure,
other ways that externality is affecting us. Do you think that the problem is simply there we're lacking that idea. We're lacking that like one idea that will, sort of put a patch on it, or sort of like, I guess what I'm asking is government broken? Which the answer is, of course, yes. But
yeah, well, I mean, if you're asking me like what's the silver bullet, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Right.
I mean, other than sitting every
I guess I'm
person
asking-
down
I
in
guess
the
I'm
country
asking-
and going and not letting them leave until they understand what an
Right.
externality is.
I guess I'm asking you not what is a silver bullet. I guess I'm asking you, why isn't there a silver bullet?
Hmm.
Is it just simply corruption, men in power, that kind of shit?
No,
That
no,
sort of fun apocalyptic stuff that I enjoy.
no, because I think it's too easy of a
Right, it's
of
a
an
cop out.
It's a cop out. Yeah. I think it's
Some real Jesse the Body Ventura shit. Yeah.
well, yeah. I mean, it's again, not to harp on libertarians too much, but it's like
no, I get it.
totally. It's totally the Gary Johnson thing of like,
Sure.
well, it's just as simple, guys. And it's like, well, it's not that
Right.
fucking simple, dude. You're just an idiot, man.
Sure.
And so it's not. It is simple, and that it's not simple, right? Like,
Right. And that's literally
that's life, I
That's
guess.
life.
It's the universe.
Right, yeah.
But it's in the sense of it's so simple in the fact that it's not just black and white.
right.
And if we could all just drop the flags and the banners for a second and go Bernie or Romney or whatever,
yeah.
and just go, well, no, let's all approach it with some skepticism. Let's make our best predictions about what will happen with these circumstances.
Okay.
Let's try something. And then
Implementation.
yeah,
Right.
and experimentation and iteration and development. But everybody is so locked into their corners, and that has only gotten way, way worse
Right,
as years have gone on in recent history.
Gotcha.
So I don't know.
Well, it's fascinating, and it's I feel like this was a success in the sense that I learned a thing. I definitely understand externality completely, which I'm not gonna lie, I was trepidatious when I was like, all right, I'm sitting down, I'm gonna learn about economics. I was
Yeah.
I was wondering if this was gonna go right over my head, and I was just gonna be totally fucking lost.
But there's an actual like jargon word, but the jargon word I hope has turned into a concept, a real thing.
No, absolutely. It makes perfect sense. And also it's the sort of thing that now I'm probably going to think about a lot. When I'm buying shit, I'm going to be like, oh, I wonder what's happening. I wonder what's not being paid for here.
Exactly. Right. And I think you will start to see that. When you start to think about all the transactions that you go through in your life
Right.
day by day, and all the costs that you're paying and all the costs that somebody is paying to bring you something.
Right.
You're going to suddenly realize all of this
There's
stuff.
a third party and a fourth party and a fifth party and a
Yeah.
sixth party sometimes, right?
Absolutely. And that stuff is all over the place.
I mean, literally any business, again, not to harp on the environmental aspect of this, but literally any business that has any product ever or any good that is ever delivered ever anywhere has a carbon footprint of some sort.
Absolutely.
That is ultimately the largest externality you can imagine. Like every time a car is started,
And
there's
that's-
an externality.
And that's the thing. And again, we're like, this is environmental and therefore political.
We really
sure.
leaned into it. Yeah.
And so we're not sidestepping that aspect, but climate change is absolutely the definitive
Right. Yeah.
example, and certainly the most important one in our
Right.
time. And this is the other thing that pisses me off, is because everybody has retreated to their corners for their own political gain.
Right.
So here's a very straightforward and economically uncontroversial way to basically deal with climate change very easily,
Right.
called cap and trade
Okay.
or a carbon tax. And if you were to tune into Fox News when they did a segment on cap and trade or carbon tax, you would watch them scream like banshees about socialism or blah blah blah, whatever the fuck it is, right? Because people have retreated to their corners, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, a carbon tax or a cap and trade system is the most economically efficient, free market friendly way of dealing with climate change that there is.
Right.
Because literally, you're just dealing with the externality of it. You're saying, okay,
you're putting a cost on the externality. You're telling the manufacturer of widgets, hey, you got to pay for that sludge.
the sludge that you're tossing out the back,
right.
the carbon that you're spewing out of the smokestack, is a cost that you're incurring on everybody else, but is your cost.
But if you pay for it,
that's fine.
then you're fine.
Then you're totally fine.
Right.
And that's all we had to do. And if we had done that in the 70s, we'll be totally fucking fine right now.
Right.
And we could still do it today if everybody came out of their corners and being like, just like, oh, I just want to watch liberals cry.
Right. Right.
It's like, no, if we actually wanted to solve the actual problem that's in front of us, this is the way to do it.
Sure.
And it's a way to do it by making a new market.
Right.
And by creating yet another way for people to get rich.
Sure.
And to get rich by creating value where value did not exist before.
Gotcha.
Right? Because we have all these ways of making these things that are inefficient because they damage the environment.
Right.
And so if we create this new system, this new market, then we create a way for people to make the process more efficient.
Gotcha.
The only problem is that the cost has become separated from the person incurring the cost.
Gotcha.
And if we reconnect those, then the free market will work its magic.
Gotcha. And in which case your 101 course might be a little bit more on
and at that moment, then you get to go back to Economics 101 and say free
market is everything. Yeah.
Great.
Well, this was incredibly educational. I do look forward to every episode of this just devolving into just Armageddon.
Bitching about libertarians.
No, just Armageddon. Just being like, well, this is the end of the world then. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this is fun. I look forward to doing this.
Yeah, I think that went pretty well.
Yeah, I think that went great. I'm again, I feel educated.
Cool.
And I will say this, now that we're done with it, I am a terrible student.
Yeah,
I was a terrible student in school. I hated college. I'm not a good learner. But I think it's also because I was never able to engage. I feel like I'm a good learner this way, one-on-one. I feel like when I can stop you and ask a question, or I can, paint a picture how I need to be painted. I was never good in lectures. Like in college, I could sit there and listen to a lecture and just not get anything.
This is a whole other conversation. But the way formal education is built is really fucking stupid.
It's really hard.
And it's a perfect example of people not changing.
Yeah.
Just because people don't change.
The way,
it's like, literally, class, as we understand it, is just an extension of the ancient Greeks standing in front of a group of people. It's Socrates
just
standing in front of
orating,
people going, this is what I think about these things and these. And like, we just haven't fucking changed that for 5,000 years. We have computers and we have all of these awesome things now. But we're still basically stuck in this, like, just listening to Socrates standing in front of us talking about whatever the fuck he wants to talk about.
Are we now collectively Socrates, though? Maybe we're the problem. Who knows? In any case, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the very first edition of What the Heckonomics. You can find myself on Twitter at LiquidJake, and you can find Brian on Twitter.
Brian Finifter, BrianFinifter.
To discuss the show, use the hashtag #WhatTheHeckonomics. Do us a favor, subscribe, leave us a review. If you're listening to on iTunes, Castbox, Stitcher, wherever you are, they all have their own review systems. 5-star ratings are delightful. Actual written reviews are delightful. We look forward to hearing you bitch at how we're wrong about things. We engage. We are excited about engaging in an actual commentary if people are interested.
Sure, again, absolutely. However, one last disclaimer that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. So if you pull this out at a cocktail party and you're wrong because of me, that's on you. That is all on you.
But thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Cheers.
Hey, it's Zen Zenith.
And I'm Jake Lloyd.
And we're here to talk about Dragon Wagon Radio. This podcast you're listening to right now is a podcast on the Dragon Wagon Radio Network.
Yes, it's a network that you and I started out of a desire to give voice to artists who maybe didn't have the platform previously to do a show the way that they want to do it.
You can find it all online at dragonwagonradio.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.